Welcome, friends. I am Mark Bowman, Executive Director of the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network. We are so pleased to be sharing these inspiring programs with you as part of our 20th anniversary Queering Our Roots campaign. For those of you who may be new to LGBTQ-RAN, we are a unique online enterprise preserving the history of LGBTQ religious movements around the world. We encourage and support LGBTQ leaders and groups to donate their papers and records to repositories, and we provide extensive information about LGBTQ religious history on our website. If you've not been there before, check us out at www.lgbtqreligiousarchives.org. You'll have great fun exploring there. Today's program is the fourth of 5 webinars honoring elders of LGBTQ religious movements in the US. Previous webinars honored the Reverend Dr. Janie Spar, Reverend Jonathan Thunderword, and Evelyn Torton Beck, PhD. In these webinars, the elder participates in an intergenerational dialogue with a younger activist thinker. Today, we are honoring Archbishop Carl Bean, who tragically completed his earthly life last month. Carl will be represented today by Beatitude Bishop Zachary Jones, who will be in dialogue with the Reverend Paul Anthony Daniels. Before I introduce today's presenters, LGBTQ-RAN board member Marnie Warner wants to talk to you about a special opportunity.
Hi, everyone. I am Marnie Warner, chair of the LGBTQ-RAN Board of Directors, and I want to add my thank you for joining us today for this intergenerational conversation as part of the Celebrating Queering Our Roots, remembering 20 years of the remarkable LGBTQ-RAN project. As the board was planning these anniversary events, we were clear that we needed to remember the past in order to guide us into the future. As we celebrate all that LGBTQ-RAN has accomplished over the past 20 years, we also must empower the continuation of this historic work. We set an auspicious goal to raise $20,000 for the 20th anniversary to help us lay the foundation for the next 20 years. If you've already attended a launch party or another one of the intergenerational conversational series, you've heard about our goal to raise $20,000, and not only to meet the board's challenge, but an anonymous donor has also agreed to match dollar for dollar up to the $20,000. So we really have a challenge before us. Thanks to everyone who's already donated, including our partners and sponsors. We've now raised over $15,500. However, we need more contributions, especially if you're attending for the first time or haven't donated, as we definitely want to complete this challenge by the end of our closing gala on November 7th. It's easy to give. You only need to type GVI give, I can't pronounce it even, give, gibeq.org into your phone or your computer, or scan the QR code. You can also donate by going to the Queering Our Roots campaign on the LGBTQ-RAN website. Your gift is fully tax deductible. And a special encouragement to any first-time donors. Ellie Charlton has offered to match contributions from first-time donors, so your gift will be tripled. $25 becomes $75, $100 becomes $300. As you know, it's remarkable how much LGBTQ-RAN accomplishes on its very small budget. We've been driven by the mantra that history is preserved from the perspective of those who preserve their records. We're committed to ensuring our collective legacy will be passed on to future generations. So please, if you can, give us as generous a gift as you can today. And thank you for your generous support. Really, LGBTQ-RAN as an organization is what it is today because of your past support and hopefully your support into the future. And now I'll turn it back to Mark.
Thank you so much, Marnie, for extending the invitation to support Queering Our Roots. Now I'm honored to introduce to you today's presenters. Today we are honoring Archbishop Carl Bean, who has been the voice and embodiment of liberating love for Black men, women, and families over the past 4 decades. Born into a Baptist family in Baltimore in 1944, Carl was blessed with musical gifts that stirred the hearts of those around him. He grew up in Providence Baptist Church, where he heard a message of God's acceptance and grace that helped shape his theology. As a young adult, Carl was welcomed into the gospel music world and performed with well-known ensembles in New York and Chicago. Even as his fame and popularity grew, Carl felt deep inside that something was missing. So at age 28, he took a bus cross-country to Los Angeles to start over. There he formed a new ensemble, Carl Bean and Universal Love, and in 1977, recorded the gay anthem, I Was Born This Way. Carl faithfully responded to God's call to ministry through studies, leading to his ordination in 1982. He then placed ads in local African-American newspapers, inviting persons to Bible study in the home of an openly gay minister. This was the beginning of the Unity Fellowship of Christ Church. Carl saw the deep pain and isolation that HIV/AIDS brought to the Black gay community, so he formed the Minority AIDS Project. He tirelessly worked to provide education and bring comfort to Black men and their families who were fighting the disease. Carl's charismatic leadership and his bold proclamation that God is love and love is for everyone drew countless persons to the Unity Fellowship of Christ churches in cities across the US. Carl lovingly shepherded this community until his death last month. Carl is being represented today by Beatitude Bishop Zachary Jones. Zachary was born and raised in Los Angeles in the late 1950s. He felt a strong call to ministry from a young age and was deeply involved in his Baptist church. A spiritual explorer, Zachary later moved into the Pentecostal community and affiliated with the West Adams Foursquare Church. He studied and graduated from Palos Verdes Bible Study and served at Foursquare Church as a minister and teacher. However, Zachary realized that there was something missing and began to explore what it would mean to live as a gay man. Finding little support from his family or religious community, he entered a time of exile and searching. A friend invited him to go to church, where he met the Reverend Carl Bean, whose message of love and liberation touched him deeply. Zachary volunteered with the Minority AIDS Project and began assisting Reverend Bean by driving him to hospital visits and teaching Sunday school. At age 29, Zachary was appointed by Bean to be assistant pastor of the congregation. 5 years later, he went to New York City to start a Unity Fellowship congregation there. While pastoring in New York, Reverend Jones became one of the elders of the Unity Fellowship, and in 2007 was consecrated to the House of Bishops and became senior bishop and administrator of the Unity Fellowship. Beatitude Bishop Jones is now taking on the mantle of leadership following the death of Archbishop Bean. Jones will be in conversation today with the Reverend Paul Anthony Daniels. Paul was born and raised in the cradle of St. Ambrose Church, a Black Episcopal congregation in Raleigh, North Carolina. The congregation had been formed by St. Augustine College, a historically Black institution, and provided a loving spiritual home for Paul's formative years. After recognizing his gay identity, Paul moved to Atlanta and enrolled at Morehouse College and explored new opportunities. He earned a BA in philosophy and moved to Boston to live in a monastic community for young persons. He continued searching and growing by serving as a young adult minister in South Africa for 2 years. He returned to the US to study at Yale Divinity School. He was an ordained and Episcopal priest a year ago and now serves as assistant clergy at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. Daniels is currently a third-year PhD student at Fordham University, where he is exploring how the thinking of Howard Thurman informs Black queer theology today. Paul sees himself as a keeper of the faith who accompanies people to wonder. The format for today's dialogue is that we will listen to an audio clip of Archbishop Caro Bean speaking, followed by Zachary and Paul reflecting on the Archbishop's words and life. As you enjoy this dialogue, feel free to type any questions into the Q&A box, which is typically at the bottom of your screen. If you would like to meet and greet today's presenters, hang around after the webinar ends, and you will be invited into the Zoom room to speak with them. Now, we welcome Beatitude Bishop Zachary Jones and the Reverend Paul Anthony Daniels to the screen as we listen to words from Archbishop Caro Bean.
So I'm talking about being connected to the religion of slaves. And what a privilege to really know that that's what I come from and what I was nurtured in. And it was so real and it was so authentic that as I sit here today, it's still real in my heart. I still hear them. And I still know it's the voice of God as I hear their voices. Because what it said to us, that this is a time when they could have been dragged out of that church and hung by a tree. It said that this power is present with us in this Southern experience. And also the words they were singing was talking about it being a deliverer from the experience. So their theology was so big and so real and so broad, and probably one of the earliest songs that I ever knew and still love to sing around the house is "Oh Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh Mary, don't you weep." Because today, then it was probably the rhythms and the harmony. Now I realize what they were saying to each other, no matter what they had gone through in those counties, in the backwoods, that when they sang that to each other, "Oh Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Pharaoh's army got drowned dead. Oh Mary, don't you weep," was no matter what the sheriff is doing or his posse or the clan, Pharaoh's army got drowned. We will survive this, because the very fact that Pharaoh's army got drowned, it meant that they found freedom on the other side in the promised land. So they had taken that story from Old Testament, knowing that it applied, that God was still that God and was still working for them. And so today, when I think about that, I am now much more in the process of looking at the theology that was passed on to me prior to the classroom. What made me a believer? And that's what really made me a believer. So I remember Grandma's hand in Baltimore taking me up to Israel, but it was really Mulberry Baptist in Virginia that she was trying to duplicate and make sure I was connected to there in Baltimore.
Beatitude Bishop Jones, what a pleasure it is to be with you this afternoon. Hello, everyone who's joined us. It's such a privilege to be able to sit down with someone, Archbishop being loved and trusted so much. So thank you for being here.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome, Reverend Paul. It is a pleasure. I'm going to try real hard not to tear up at listening to my 40-year friend, his voice and hearing it yet one more time. So yeah, let's talk about this great and fabulous warrior.
We'll let you do what the Spirit says to do.
Thank you.
You know, there's so much to cover, and he had such an extraordinary life um, and just an unusual life, you know. And one I think generally you can look at and say, oh, that's somebody that followed a call, right? But he is very clear in that first clip what the foundation of that call, of that life, of reality itself was for him: slave religion, Black religion. Can you just talk a little bit about how you saw that commitment, that sort of embodied commitment to ancestral, to slave, to Black religion, sort of lived out in Archbishop Bean's life?
Sure. Well, let me first say that our relationship was that of one that was very unusual, and yet very powerful. We spent a lot of the early years of cultivating our theology and our denomination. UFCM is a denomination recognized by the state of California. And as he was receiving dreams and visions, Archbishop was truly a mystic, and he lived that life. I was one of those few people who got a chance to see it evolve. And so he would have these dreams, and he would ask me, knowing that I had been to theological seminary, he would ask me about certain scriptures that he remembered that helped to crystallize these visions that he was having. And so as he began to shape his belief and his thoughts around his theology, he would go back to some of the known hymns of the Black Baptist experience. And so he would ask me about them. And Archbishop was unapologetically Black. He just loved Black culture. He loved and felt that, we were not, that we monumented ourselves from slavery versus having it done for us. And so he lived that, and he sought to lift the positive energy around our people's freedom and how it came to be. So I hope that answers your question.
It does answer my question. I think, the particular clip that we heard just there is from an excerpt from an interview where central for him, right, in the Black church experience, in the Black Baptist tradition in the South, was music, right? And was the rhythm and the movement and the sound. And I think he says in that clip, in the beginning, it was the sound. In the beginning, it was the rhythm. And then later came the content, right? But it was so important for him as a child, he says, not to play in the graveyard with the other kids, but to go to the church house where there was a kind of worship happening. And that becomes his life, right? I mean, he goes into the gospel world as a singer. He goes into the pop world as a singer. There's this combination of the sacred and the profane around music in the life of the bishop. Can you talk about how he handled that relationship with music and living it in two different worlds?
Certainly. Both Archbishop and I are musicians. I am a jazz pianist, and so we had that in common as well. Although Archbishop lived the life of a professional gospel singer, and anybody knows the Black church or the Black church experience knows that it doesn't matter how big or small those churches may be or those gatherings, you got to have music, right? Because music is the central element of our rhythm, our flow, and our being. So that was common for us to focus on lyrics and what they meant down through the past, because many of those lyrics were coded and carried messages even from the field of slaves, our foreparents. And so down by the riverside meant that there was going to be a meeting at a certain location. It was music that was used for the Underground Railroads that people would sing for gatherings and meeting times. And so it was really an ingenious strategy that many of our foreparents used to usher enslaved members into freedom and to escape. And so Archbishop saw that even in his times during the 40s growing up. And many of the lyrics that he sang as a young artist carried those messages of freedom. And so when it came to his ministry, there was clear conflict around his love for music and his obedience to spirit and what it was that ultimately became his divine purpose. And so we talked a lot about that struggle.
Yeah, what was that? What was that conflict?
Well, the conflict was people knew he was a gifted artist. They knew that his voice made you stop in your footsteps and listen. He just had that. He was a smaller man in his younger days, but he had this huge voice. And the voice could fill a room, even his spoken voice. It would just fill the room. And so people wanted him to sing. Oh, Bishop, can you sing? And he would give them just a little bit sometimes because he didn't want to be known as a singer any longer. He wanted to be known as the mystic and the leader that he became. So therein lies the conflict.
Therein lies the conflict, right? I mean, so much of what I think some younger generations know about him, right, or is sort of the music, right? But there's a particular way in which, again, the music leads him, or is that thing which carries him into the next phase, right? Into the mystical phase, into the ministry phase, really, right? And I am so intrigued by that transformation, by that movement. I want us to listen to a clip of Archbishop Bean when he's moved from New York City, right? He's had the gospel career, he's had the pop career. It's the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, and he moves to Los Angeles and has nothing, right? And he just goes. And there he is in the midst of a crisis like we've never seen before. And he is caring for people, and he's asked to sit on a panel at a university in California. And this is what happens.
And I said, look, I'm doing this. I don't have a lot of research or anything like that to tell you, but I can tell you what it's like to be Black and homosexual and frightened. And to be one institution you love turns its back on you. And I know that's what God has called me to do, is let them know that God hasn't turned his back on them. I don't know how I'm gonna do it. I don't know what I'm gonna do. Right now, I just visit hospitals and tell them God loves them. I hug them, I hold them, and I got a phone that they can call and I can talk to them. And people are responding. So that was that. So we named it Minority AIDS Project. I just told my little Bible study group, look, I just go to hospitals. When they asked me in the article, I just said Minority AIDS Project. I didn't really have a name. So, but I don't want you guys to feel you have to, they said, oh, no, we want to help. So MAP was born out of that Bible study group, really. But it was really born out of Samuel Proctor. I mean, when I really think back, it was what he put in me at the Lock Carey Christian Youth Fellowship at Virginia Union in 56, 57, whatever those years were. It was that. That's really what was making it all happen. And needless to say, God continued to lift me.
Okay, there's so much there.
Yeah, right.
I've got three different things that I would like for you to respond to. The first, and if you need for me to repeat them, I will. The first is, I didn't have any research, he said. All I knew is that I was Black, homosexual, and frightened. So my first question is, from being with him, and perhaps even from your own experience, would you mind talking about the 80s? So many of us Black queer, Black femme, Black gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual folks, we lost so many of those people who would have been our elders and sort of accompanied us into understanding of who we are. You were lucky enough to have someone in your life to do that in many ways. I was as well. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about what it was like to be in that space and time. And then the second thing that I want to hear you talk about is Bishop Bean's capacity. He said he knew what it was like to be rejected from an institution that he loved. But even in rejection, right, he has this capacity to see the essence of the thing at work. And so he never loses his faith in God. He never loses his faith in the capacity for a community of people to gather around the story of the ultimate healer. He just takes the best of the tradition that rejected him and transforms it into a moment of healing. Can you just talk about those two things? What was that time period like? And how did Archbishop Bean carry forth the goodness of a thing that so many people have rejected because they've been rejected by it?
Sure. So let's talk about his call to AIDS. One of the things, when I describe him as a mystic, the only scripture that I can think of that comes to mind immediately is it was the three wise men who were the mystics that followed the star, right? And ultimately brought gifts to the child Jesus, right? So therein lies the definition or the image of the mystic, following the star. So Archbishop talked to me, our conversations often took off like this. Zach, I keep having these dreams, and I have these dreams that won't leave, and they're vivid. And one of the dreams that seems to be constant is that I'm hearing voices. Now, of course, when you start telling people you're hearing voices, they're ready to call the psychologists in to talk about schizophrenia or any other number of psychological ills. And so he felt comfortable enough to share them with me. And he says, in these dreams, I keep hearing cries of people who are very sick and people who have nowhere else to turn. And I don't know how to respond to them. I don't know what to do with these dreams. Now, I never considered myself an interpreter of dreams. That was not one of my gifts. I do have some other charismatic gifts. Dream interpretation is clearly not one that I laid claim to. And so as he created this space to talk through this, so came the simplicity of that particular clip. All I know to do is love them. All I know to do is visit. All I know to do is give what I have and move from there. Now, Minority AIDS Project became a staple at one point on the corner of Jefferson Boulevard in Southern California. And Dionne Warwick, it called forth her. It called for Patti LaBelle. It called for Magic Johnson. It called for many great people and other warriors. So to say what it became is important because it did become this leading organization from his holding on to the essence, as you say, and moving with that essence of love and watching what it does. And from that simplicity came these experts in other fields, and it began to evolve from there. His capacity to hold on to that essence, I think, was born out of his navigating the world from one point to the next, and his provisions that God continued to show up, even for him, a gay man. And I say that because that was contrary many times to the teachings and the preachings of the Black gospel experience.
Sure. I mean, he was, he was able to identify, right? I mean, moments of possibility where there seemed to be impossibility. And he couldn't deny, right? There was something in that, something showed up almost every single time there was a turning point, he had to say. And I imagine, again, I'm thinking a lot about embodiment, right? How he thinks about sound and how he thinks about movement through music, and how that transforms into his healing of bodies, that God for him is this enfleshed experience, right? And I just can't help but to think that a part of his capacity to be a seer, had something to do with being being raised or trained up in the thing, right? And that the thing spoke through even sort of distortions of it, right? That God spoke through distortions of God's gospel. I mean, I think that's perhaps one of the most intriguing parts of his story.
You sound so much like a musician. I didn't check that part of your background, but you're speaking the voice of an artist, because it is all about essence. It is all about finding the center of existence and reaching out for those answers why. And so Archbishop actually lived that, and he lived it in ways that gave him that sort of third realm sound of hearing what others could not hear, of seeing what others could not see. Archbishop, it's very, he doesn't talk about this one experience much, and I kind of got on him a lot of times for it, but in his humility, and the Los Angeles Times has a record of this particular period, he went on a hunger strike because we weren't getting the kinds of funding that was necessary for the people he represented. And he came to me, I was the first voice that he declared this hungry strike to. He says, I'm going on a hunger strike. I was like, immediately, my love for him was like, what? You can't do that. No, there's gotta be another way. He says, no, I'm going on a hunger strike until we get the kind of support that we need. He says, I've tried everything else. I've knocked on every other door, and I'm gonna sacrifice myself until we get the funding that is necessary in the Black community for HIV/AIDS. And so, living through that and watching this warrior, this giant, be so willing to give of himself in that way, it was just, it was spellbinding. And, but, as the story goes, we got a favorable response. People came out, people stood with us, and it was very, very powerful. So when we talk about his drive or his holding on to the essence, at the end of the day, someone told me that in order to, in the Catholic Church, to be a sainthood, you have to have so many miracles that occur in order to qualify, right? Well, in his day, he clearly qualified because he held on to the sound of divine universal. He held on to it. He related to it. It became as real for him as any other daily experience. And that in lies the depth of his capacity to move through and penetrate all other noise, including his sexuality. And that's what he wanted to teach and to share.
Right. I mean, and so that's really a fascinating point that we have to touch, right? Which is often in, in mystical theology, in the Christian tradition, which is what I understand best of all the mystical traditions, there is something of universality, right? That's at work, a sort of being subsumed into the oneness of God's self, whereby one surpasses identity, And so I think it's interesting to hear you talk about him as both deeply and unapologetically Black, right? And deeply and unapologetically gay, and also sort of moving through those identities and their cultural production toward a horizon whereby even that may fade away, right? Even these things that ground me in a certain identity, they may be noise to a certain extent once we get to a place, right, of utter ecstasy or something like that, right? I mean, I hear you saying that was an essential part too of his sort of mystical thinking, that there was a horizon whereby all of this would move. Is that right?
That therein lies the miracle of it all. He was fully clear. He was so clear, like crystal clear, as he was moving. Did he always know where it was going? No, he did not. Again, he was following the star. Wherever the star led him, that's where he would go. And he would spend hours and hours talking through them, which was only, a fraction of the time he must have spent in the uncomfortableness of these messages that were coming to him. And I can only imagine what that has been like just from my own experience with the mystic God, universal God, and what that struggle sometimes is between our personal ego and what needs to happen for the people that we serve, So he would say to me, Zach, what is that scripture that says? And he'd show up with just a word of a scripture. And I'd say, well, what about this one? He'd say, no, not that one. Let's try this. Doesn't it say? And when I get the scripture to him, he yes, that's it. That's the one. So he would verify these experiences through these scriptures that I was throwing at him, and then he would land at the one that seemed to resonate with his inner experience. I don't know if that answered the question, but
that does. I wanna move on to the last clip of him speaking, because I think it encapsulates his theology so well. If we can consider that.
I just count it a privilege to be able to tell people that Jesus is available to anyone and everyone who just say yes to him. And that's really it. It's very little to do with me and everything to do with God, who really is love. And my purpose is to live the love that God told me to demonstrate through the message that God is in fact love. And that's beyond personification. That's beyond male, female. But love, God really is love. And that really is available for everyone. And that transcends all categories, all theology, all churches, everything. It's just there and available for birds, bees, flowers. God is love, and love is healing, and it delivers.
Yeah. What did it feel like to be loved by Carl Bean?
Wow. Well, to be loved by him was fun. Archbishop loved to laugh, and so do I. So we had that. We would just laugh in the midst of, here we are in another pandemic. And I think the thing that is missing for me the most is the level of laughter. Not that we were laughing at the situation, but we found the joy in the midst of our struggle. And we found ways to laugh at ourselves and be fun with ourselves as campy gay guys, and in many, many other ways as we were doing the work. You know, in mystical thinking, we have this saying that says, all that I know nothing unless I can demonstrate a better life. And so the demonstrativeness of living love was Archbishop's aim. And so I was able to see that in so many ways and carry that to one of our first churches that was born out of our work. And so the Archbishop was able to tap into that essence of love and then present to us the transcendent God, and the God that transcended all of these things that you had to go through to be so-called saved, all of these things that you had to go through to be baptized, and the fasting and all of the rituals that are often put upon people. And it was like, no, it just really doesn't take that. The power is in the simplicity. The power is in just saying yes to the divine mind that is already there. You don't have to go get it. You don't have to go find it. You don't have to go research it. It is fully present. Right. And all you have to do is yield to it. Right. I think that was a part of the journey of finding his way back to the simplicity of his belief. Right. And it just all agreed with the transcendent God that he came to know and share. Yeah.
And he saw you in a very simple and straightforward way, didn't he? I mean, when you all met for the first time, it just, you know, just no fuss about it. He said, this is who you are.
One day I was visiting the church, as my introduction that Mark so eloquently shared. You know, I was at the church visiting. I was going to sit in the back, be unknown, be unnamed. And I'm walking out the door and he says to me, the Lord has shown me you are going to play a major role in this movement. I didn't even know what a movement was other than from the 60s. And so I'm looking at him like, okay, God needs to tell me. Well, 40 years later, the history is what it is.
It is what it is. I do want to say, in terms of movement, this has to go on the record, that somebody in this interview said, or picked up on the part where Archbishop Bean said, he was reared in part by Samuel Proctor, the great Samuel Proctor. And, you know, sort of grew up at a church in Baltimore, and his pastor there was a student of Proctor. And he would go to youth leadership conferences over the summer where he would encounter Proctor. And a part of the Black religious and slave religion tradition was political conscientizing, right? They would literally go into the basement of the church and learn how to organize and learn how to be a part of demonstrations like a hunger strike, right? Like how to take care of each other in the context of movement making. And so it's just so incredible to see how his entire life from this one moment sort of exploded, right, into a ministry that was able to take in the complexity, right, and the beauty of precisely who he was, and who the people were that he loved, right? And I just think that kind of complication and complexity often gets lost, right? Sometimes when we talk about the Black church, and I just wanted to raise it up as it was always both a spiritual and a political tradition, and is still.
Absolutely. That was our, continuation of a tradition where our religion, our faith was merged and interconnected with either A, our talent, ergo the many talented people that came out of the Black church, or B, and or both, our political understanding and organizing. So it was a dubious way that we shared our faith continuously.
Beatitude Bishop, what a privilege and a pleasure and honor to be able to talk to you. And
thank you, Reverend Paul.
And we now have a new friendship.
Yes, yes, indeed.
So thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
This is certainly a captivating conversation. Paul and Zachary, thank you so much.
You're
We do have a little more time. If anyone else would like to ask a question of them, remember you can also stay after this webinar and we'll invite you into the room if you'd like to have just time to meet and greet with Beatitude Bishop Jones and Reverend Daniels. You can do that. Again, there's a moment here for Q&A. As I'm pausing, I have a question for each of you, if you would ponder to close with. And Bishop, the Archbishop accomplished so much, Zachary, and really saw you as continuing on his legacy. Can you share some of what his vision is for Unity Fellowship continuing and how that's continuing on? And if there's some of that you can share, you can do that, but you can think about that. My question for you, Paul, is as an emerging Black queer leader, what's the wisdom legacy that Archbishop Bean offers to the emerging generation of Black queer leaders? Because today's a different day than when he lived 40 years ago, but still his wisdom carries on. So that's a question for each of you. If whoever would like to respond first would be welcome to do that.
Well, you asked me first, so I'll just take that privilege. Unity Fellowship Church movement will definitely continue. There are visions of a global expansion. We have 17 churches around the country carrying the message, God is love and love is for everyone. Gay marriages didn't set us all free. We still got a lot of work to be done. There's still a lot of suffering among LGBTQ-RAN people of all colors, all faiths, that people are living every day of their lives. And I think a friend of mine said to me this, oh, it's so much easier now. And I don't know that that's really true. We've got to, once we start talking to folks around the country and around the world, we're seeing a lot of LGBTQIA oppression that we've got to really treat and be available to and support. So our work is definitely cut out for us. Our plan is to build on Archbishop's legacy and to create a continual legacy for Unity Fellowship Church movement. We've got a strategic plan of a 50% expansion over the next 5 years. So we're off and running and continuing that process.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, I think, I don't know if I have any, I don't know if you said advice, but my dream for Black queer folks is that folks will be able to see that, again, that political transformation means spiritual transformation, right? Like proper political transformation means that your capacity to see reality in a completely new way, and that reality, the transformed reality, is always already available. Transformed reality is always already in the making, and that transformed reality that always already is the Spirit of God, right? And we cannot even have a political program or have political hope or have, sort of political imagination without this transformed reality that's always beckoning or calling us or grasping us. And I think it's when you have that kind of deep commitment, or when you have that kind of imagination, right, that the transformed reality, which is God, is always already beckoning us, nothing can stop you, right? Like nothing can discourage you to the point of betrayal, to the point of quitting, right? Because you know that even if you don't see it, just calling it out will begin to sort of transform how people see what is possible. That's what I hope that Black queer people can accept, is that, you know, this is a spiritual battle, in as much as it is a straightforward political.
Powerful.
Yeah.
Powerful.
Again, thank you both. You have many accolades in the chat box for both of you for, I think what people are hearing is a brilliant, probing, and thoughtful discussion that's just beginning, and a lot more to come. And so I appreciate you planting some seeds for our continual exploration.
Thank you.
Before we wrap up today's program, LGBTQ-RAN board member Marnie Warner has a reminder for you.
So I'll continue where Mark sort of left off. Wonderful conversation. And, you know, I loved hearing what can a 40-year friendship really be, you know, with really getting to know each other and support each other through thick and thin, I guess.
Yes. Oh, yes.
But I will also follow up that I'm the person who's going to remind you that we need donations. And as people say that they'd like these kind of things to continue, we need to pay staff to help them to continue. And so if you haven't given to the campaign, I just encourage you to do so. And as I said, there are many ways to give. You can type in the givq.org. You can give online to the LGBTQ-RAN website. And again, to people who are first-time givers, you can triple the amount of money you give. So please, 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 please give what you can. And if you've already given, thank you. And I'll turn it back to Mark.
The recording of today's program will be posted on the LGBTQ-RAN website soon, so you can listen to it and share it with friends. Looking ahead, do join us next Wednesday for the final intergenerational dialogue, in which we honor the Reverend Elder Troy Perry, founder of the Metropolitan Community Churches, in conversation with Mathia Roberts, inspiring writer and speaker about queerology. And then please don't miss the festive wrap-up gala for the Queering Our Roots campaign, which will happen on Sunday afternoon, November 7. Sign up now to get the link for this online Zoom gathering, in which we'll recapitulate the highlights of our month-long anniversary campaign and launch LGBTQ-RAN into its next decade. Remember that if you'd like to speak with today's presenters, hang around after this closing video, and you'll be invited into the Zoom room with them. Thank you, all of you, once again, for joining us today.